You should have learned when to shut your mouth. The cafe fell silent as James Pello's boot connected with Ruth Keaton's side. The impact sent her crashing into a table, coffee cups exploding across the floor like shrapnel. Chairs scraped. Someone screamed. A child started crying. Ruth hit the ground hard, pain radiating through her ribs. James stood over her, chest heaving, face twisted with satisfaction. He thought he'd won. Thought he'd finally put her in her place. The other customers stared in frozen horror, some with phones raised, most too shocked to move. But Ruth didn't stay down. She pushed herself up, shaking but upright, eyes locked on his. "You don't get to touch me," she said through the pain. James laughed. "Who's gonna stop me? You?" That's when the doors opened. The man who entered wore a black suit, tattoos visible along his neck and hands. He moved with the kind of calm that makes rooms go quiet. Two men followed, scanning the space with professional precision. The casual chatter died. Silverware stopped clinking. Customers who had been filming Ruth's humiliation now lowered their phones, confusion replacing their shock. The woman they'd pitied moments ago suddenly looked different. Protected. Dangerous. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. All right, let's get back into it. 3 weeks earlier, Ruth Keaton walked into the Riverside Cafe that morning the same way she had for 2 years early, prepared, professional. She tied her apron with practiced efficiency, nodded at the line cook through the window, and began her opening routine, filling sugar dispensers, checking menus, brewing the first pot of coffee that would fill the air with its dark, familiar comfort. She had warm brown skin, dark curly hair she kept pulled back in a neat bun, and the kind of steady presence that made customers feel immediately at ease. She was good at her job. Better than good. Regulars asked for her section. Tourists left generous tips with kind notes. She remembered orders, names, preferences. She was respected. But respect, she was learning, meant nothing to certain kinds of men. James Pello walked in at 10:47 a.m., just like he had every day for the past 2 weeks. Average height, casual clothes, jeans, and a dark jacket that he wore like armor. There was nothing remarkable about him except the way he looked at her, like she was already his, just waiting to realize it. "Morning, beautiful," he said, sliding into a booth in her section. Ruth approached with her notepad, professional smile in place. "Good morning. What can I get you? Your number would be a good start." She'd heard worse. She'd deflected worse. "I'll get you some coffee while you decide on food," she said evenly, turning away. His hand shot out, fingers wrapping around her wrist. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to stop her. "I'm talking to you." Ruth looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were steel. "Let go of me." He did, raising both hands in mock surrender, grinning like it was all a game. "Relax, I'm just being friendly." "Then be friendly by ordering from the menu." She walked away, heart pounding, but her hands didn't shake as she poured his coffee. She'd dealt with men like this before. They usually got bored and moved on. James didn't move on. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Each time, he pushed a little further. "You'd look better if you smiled more. A woman like you shouldn't be working here. You should let someone take care of you. You act like you're better than everyone. You're not." Ruth shut it down every time. "I'm not interested. Please stop. This is inappropriate." Her coworkers noticed. Jenna, the other waitress, pulled her aside one afternoon. "That guy's been staring at you for 20 minutes, she whispered. "Want me to tell Miguel to throw him out?" Ruth glanced over. James sat in his usual booth, coffee untouched, eyes following her every movement. "He hasn't done anything actionable yet," Ruth said quietly. "Just keep an eye out." But it escalated. One evening, after her shift ended at 9 p.m., Ruth stepped out into the parking lot. The air was cool, the streetlights casting long shadows. She pulled her jacket tighter and headed toward the bus stop. Footsteps echoed behind her. She turned. James stood 20 feet away, hands in his pockets, smiling. "Hey," he called. "Wait up." Ruth's pulse spiked. She kept walking, faster now. "I said wait." She spun around under a streetlight, keys between her fingers like she'd been taught. "Stop following me." James laughed. Actually laughed, like she'd told a joke. "Relax. I just wanted to make sure you got home safe. It's dangerous out here for a woman alone." "I'm fine. Leave." Now, he took a step closer. You know, you'd be a lot prettier if you weren't so uptight all the time. I'm calling the police. She pulled out her phone. James raised his hands, backing away with that same infuriating grin. Okay. Jesus. Can't even be nice anymore. He walked back toward the cafe parking lot, whistling. Ruth stood there for 5 full minutes, watching until his car pulled away. Only then did her hands start shaking. The next morning, she reported it to her manager, Paul, a middle-aged man who'd owned the cafe for 15 years and prided himself on running a family establishment. Did he threaten you? Paul asked, barely looking up from inventory sheets. He followed me. He waits outside. He won't take no for an answer. But did he threaten you? Ruth stared at him. He's stalking me. Paul sighed. Look, Ruth. I get it. Some guys don't know when to quit, but he's a paying customer, and unless he actually does something, I can't just ban him. Try ignoring him. He'll probably get bored. Ruth felt something cold settle in her chest. So I just have to wait until it gets worse? I'm sure it won't come to that. It came to that. James didn't get bored. He got worse. The morning after Ruth's conversation with Paul, James walked into the cafe at 10:47 a.m., exactly like clockwork, like routine, like he'd already claimed a piece of her day that she couldn't take back. But something had shifted in his demeanor. The playful smirk was gone, replaced by something colder, more deliberate. He chose table 7, Ruth's section, always Ruth's section. She approached with coffee, her professional mask firmly in place, but her stomach twisted with unease. Good morning. What can I? You complained about me. His voice was flat, accusatory. Ruth's hand tightened on the coffee pot. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. He leaned back, arms crossed, studying her like she was a problem he needed to solve. You told your boss I was bothering you. Made me sound like some kind of creep. You are, she thought but didn't say. I simply mentioned that I'd prefer professional interactions with all customers, Ruth said carefully. Now, would you like to order? James's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might explode. Instead, he smiled a thin, dangerous thing that didn't reach his eyes. Pancakes. And keep the coffee coming. I'm going to be here a while. He stayed for 3 hours. He didn't eat the pancakes. He just sat there, phone in hand, occasionally looking up to make sure Ruth knew he was watching. When other customers needed her attention, his eyes followed her across the room. When she laughed at something a regular said, his expression darkened. Jenna noticed. She always noticed. He's still here, she whispered during a lull, both of them standing by the coffee station. This is insane, Ruth. He's been nursing the same cup for 2 hours. I know. You need to tell someone. Call the cops, file a report, something. Ruth had already considered it, had already played out that conversation in her head. Officer, there's this man who comes to my work every day and stares at me. No, he hasn't threatened me. No, he hasn't touched me well, once, but I told him to stop and he did. Yes, I know that doesn't sound like much, but what? But he makes her skin crawl? But her instincts are screaming? But she knows this is heading somewhere dark? And say what? Ruth asked quietly. That a customer is making me uncomfortable? That he's stalking you? He's not breaking any laws by sitting in a cafe. Yet, Jenna muttered. The word hung between them like a premonition. The pattern continued. Every day, same time, same table. James started requesting Ruth specifically. If another waitress approached, he'd wave her off. I want Ruth to take my order. Ruth knows how I like my coffee. Ruth and I have an understanding. They had no understanding. They had nothing but her escalating dread and his escalating entitlement. He began timing his visits to coincide with shift changes, watching her arrive, watching her leave. He knew her schedule better than some of her coworkers. When she tried switching shifts, he somehow knew and adjusted accordingly. The comments evolved too. You look tired. You should let someone take care of you. You know, you won't always be able to ignore me. I'm a patient man, Ruth. Very patient. The way he said her name made her skin crawl. Other customers started noticing. Mrs. Alice, a regular who came in every Tuesday for Earl Grey and blueberry scones, pulled Ruth aside one afternoon. That man in the corner, she said quietly, glancing toward James. He's been watching you for an hour. Should I call someone? Ruth appreciated the concern, but what could anyone do? He was sitting quietly, drinking coffee, breaking no rules. I'm okay, she said, not quite believing it herself. But thank you. Mrs. Alice squeezed her hand. Be careful, dear. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. Ruth's shift ended at 8 p.m. She'd started asking Jenna to walk her to the bus stop, a small humiliation that burned in her chest, needing protection just to do her job, to exist in the world. But Jenna had called in sick. Ruth stood in the cafe's break room, staring at her phone, weighing her options. She could call an Uber, expensive, but safer. She could ask Miguel, the cook, but he had to close the kitchen. She could call Massimo, but she'd already downplayed this situation to him once, and admitting how bad it had gotten felt like failure. She decided on the Uber. She stepped out the back entrance, phone in hand, waiting for her ride. The parking lot was well lit, the street busy enough. She'd be fine. Then she heard it. The scrape of a shoe on pavement. Ruth spun around. James stood 15 feet away, leaning against his car, a dark sedan she hadn't noticed when she came in that morning. Leaving without saying goodbye? He asked. Every survival instinct Ruth possessed started screaming. How long have you been out here? Long enough. He pushed off the car, taking a step closer. You've been avoiding me. I'm at work. I'm avoiding everyone equally. Don't do that. Don't act like I'm just anyone. Another step. I've been patient with you. Respectful. I come in every day. I tip well. I wait my turn. And you treat me like I'm nothing. Ruth's hand tightened on her phone. James, I need you to understand something. I'm not interested in you. I've never been interested in you. That's not going to change. His face darkened. You think you're too good for me. I think we have nothing in common. And I think you need to accept that. You don't get to decide this. The words hit like a slap. Actually, Ruth said, voice shaking but firm. I do. That's exactly how this works. James took another step, closing the distance between them to less than 10 feet. You're going to regret the way you've treated me. Ruth's Uber pulled into the parking lot, headlights sweeping across them. Stay away from me, she said, backing toward the car. If you come near me again, I'm filing a restraining order. She got in the Uber, locked the door, and watched through the window as James stood there, hands clenched at his sides, watching her drive away. That night, Ruth told Massimo everything. Ruth's hands were still shaking when she walked through the door of the apartment she shared with Massimo DeSantis. It was a modest place, nothing that would draw attention, nothing that screamed wealth or power, just a 2-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with good lighting and neighbors who minded their business. Exactly the kind of place where a cafe waitress and her fiancé could live normal lives. Except Massimo DeSantis had never lived a normal life. He was in the kitchen when she entered, sleeves rolled up, hands covered in flour. The smell of fresh pasta filled the air, homemade fettuccine, her favorite. He looked up when he heard her keys, and his expression shifted immediately. What happened? Ruth set down her purse, trying to compose herself. Nothing, just a long shift. Massimo wiped his hands on a towel, studying her with those dark, steady eyes that missed nothing. He had sharp features, a strong jawline marked with a few days' stubble, and intricate tattoos that crept up his neck and disappeared under his collar, remnants of a world he'd been born into, not chosen. Ruth, just her name, quiet, patient, inviting truth. She broke. He was waiting for me in the parking lot. Massimo went very still, the kind of still that preceded storms. James, that customer I told you about. Ruth moved to the kitchen counter, needing something solid under her hands. He's been there every day for 3 weeks. Today he waited outside after my shift. He said I'd regret how I've been treating him. Did he touch you? No, but Massimo. He knows my schedule. He knows when I arrive, when I leave. He's always there, always watching. And nobody will do anything because he hasn't technically done anything illegal. Massimo crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms. She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, sandalwood and safety. I can handle this, he said quietly. I don't want you to handle it. I want to handle it myself. Ruth pulled back to look at him. I filed a verbal complaint with Paul. I told James directly to leave me alone. I documented everything. I'm doing this the right way. The right way isn't working. Not yet. But if I let you fix it your way, what does that say? That I can't stand up for myself? That I need to hide behind you? Massimo cupped her face with both hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. It says you're protected. There's no shame in that. There is when I'm trying to be a normal person living a normal life. Her voice cracked. I left my old life behind for a reason, Massimo. I left the chaos, the violence, the constant looking over my shoulder. I became a waitress because I wanted something simple, something mine. And now this man is taking that from me. And if you step in, then everyone knows who you're with. Ruth nodded. They'd been careful. For 2 years, they'd been so careful. Massimo kept his world separate from hers. His business, whatever it was, she knew better than to ask too many questions, never touched their home, never touched her workplace. He was just her fiancé, a man who worked in private security. Someone respectable enough to not raise eyebrows. But Ruth wasn't naive. She'd seen the way men straightened when Massimo entered a room. She'd noticed how restaurant managers suddenly found better tables when he made reservations. She'd watched strangers offer respectful nods to a man they'd never met, recognition flickering in their eyes at something she couldn't see. Massimo De Santis was someone. And that someone came with consequences. I just need a little more time, Ruth said. I'm going to file a police report tomorrow. Create a paper trail. If it escalates. When it escalates. If it escalates, then we do this your way. But please let me try mine first. Massimo was quiet for a long moment, jaw tight, clearly fighting every instinct that told him to end this threat immediately. Finally, he nodded. 1 week. If he approaches you again, if he so much as looks at you wrong, we do this my way. Deal. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, gentle but possessive. You're not alone in this, he murmured against her mouth. You never have to be alone in this. I know, but part of her needed to prove she could be. That night, they ate pasta at the small kitchen table, and Massimo told her about his day in the carefully edited way he always did. Had a meeting in the city. Long, boring. Too many men with opinions and not enough solutions. Sounds frustrating. It was. He twirled fettuccine around his fork. But I kept thinking about coming home to you, and it made the rest bearable. Ruth smiled despite everything. Smooth talker. Truthful talker. They cleaned dishes together, moving around each other with the practiced ease of 2 people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Massimo washed. Ruth dried. He told her a story about one of his men, Luca, who'd apparently locked himself out of his car 3 times in one day, and she laughed until her sides hurt. For a few hours, James Pelot didn't exist. But later, when they were in bed and Massimo's breathing had deepened into sleep, Ruth lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She'd meant what she said. She wanted to handle this herself, but a small, scared part of her wondered if she was being stubborn or smart, if insisting on independence was strength or foolishness. James wasn't going to stop. She knew that with the same certainty she knew her own name. Men like him never stopped until something made them. And the question that kept her awake, the one that churned in her stomach like poison, was, what would it take? How far would this go? How much would she have to endure before the world decided her fear was justified? She turned onto her side, watching Massimo sleep. Even in rest, there was something coiled about him, ready, alert, dangerous when he needed to be. He'd asked her once, early in their relationship, if his world scared her. No, she'd answered honestly. The men who pretend to be good are scarier than the ones who are honest about what they are. Massimo had been honest from the beginning. He'd told her he couldn't give her a simple life, even though he'd try. He'd told her that loving him came with risks, with complications, with a target she'd carried just by standing next to him. She'd chosen him anyway. And tomorrow, she'd file that police report. She'd do everything right, everything by the book. But if it came down to it, if James pushed too far, Ruth knew exactly who would be waiting. Ruth filed the police report on Friday morning before her shift. Officer Hernandez listened politely, took notes, and gave her the same response she'd expected. Unless he threatens you directly or violates a restraining order, there's not much we can do. But this creates a record. If it escalates, come back. When it escalates, Ruth thought, remembering Massimo's words. She tucked the report number into her purse like a talisman and headed to work. The morning shift passed quietly. James didn't show at his usual time. By noon, Ruth had almost convinced herself that her confrontation in the parking lot had finally worked, that he'd realized she was serious and decided to move on. She should have known better. At 2:15 p.m., during the afternoon lull when the cafe was half empty and drowsy with post-lunch calm, the door opened. James walked in. But this wasn't the James who usually came smiling, persistent, playing at charm. This James had fury written across his face like a headline. His jaw was clenched, his movements sharp, his eyes locked on Ruth with an intensity that made her blood run cold. Jenna noticed immediately. Ruth, I see him. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide in the kitchen, to call someone. But she'd spent 3 weeks refusing to be intimidated, refusing to give this man power over her space, her work, her life. She wouldn't start now. Ruth approached his table with her notepad, keeping her voice steady and professional. "What can I get you?" James didn't look at the menu. He looked at her with open contempt. "You filed a police report." Her stomach dropped. "I don't know what—" "Don't." He slammed his hand on the table, making silverware jump. An elderly couple 3 tables over glanced up nervously. "Don't lie to me. A cop showed up at my job this morning, asked me about allegations of harassment, made me look like some kind of stalker in front of my boss." Ruth kept her expression neutral, but her heart was hammering. "I documented a pattern of behavior that made me uncomfortable. That's my right." "Your right?" James's laugh was ugly, bitter. "You think you have rights? You're a waitress. You smile, you serve coffee, and you're grateful when men like me even look at you." The cafe had gone quiet now. Other customers were staring. Miguel had emerged from the kitchen, dish towel in hand, watching. "I'm going to need you to lower your voice," Ruth said evenly, "or I'll have to ask you to leave." "You'll ask me to leave?" James stood abruptly, chair scraping loud against the floor. "You don't get to ask me anything. You don't get to decide anything. Actually, I do, and I'm asking you to leave. Now. You think you're so much better than me." He moved closer, invading her space. Ruth held her ground even as panic clawed at her throat. "Walking around here like you're untouchable, like you're special. But you're not. You're nothing. Just some woman serving pancakes who got lucky that I even noticed her." Ruth's hands were shaking, but her voice came out clear and cold. "Get out of this cafe, James. You're not welcome here anymore." Something in his expression shifted from anger to something darker, more dangerous. A kind of rage that had been building for weeks and finally found its release point. "You should be grateful," he hissed, voice low and venomous. "Grateful I've been patient. Grateful I've been nice. But you had to make this difficult. You had to embarrass me. Make me look like a fool. You did that yourself." The words left her mouth before she could stop them. James's face twisted. "What did you just say?" Ruth's fear crystallized into something sharp and bright and reckless. She was tired. Tired of being afraid. Tired of being polite. Tired of managing this man's ego when he'd never once considered her humanity. "I said you did this to yourself." Her voice rang clear across the cafe. "I told you no. Multiple times. I told you to stop. To leave me alone. And you didn't listen because you don't think no applies to you. You don't think women are real people with the right to reject you. So yes, you made yourself look like a fool, because that's exactly what you are." The cafe held its breath. For a moment, James just stood there, trembling with rage, face red, fists clenched at his sides. Then he moved. "You need to learn your place," he snarled, stepping so close Ruth could smell coffee on his breath. "You need to understand that you don't get to talk to me that way. You don't get to humiliate me. Step back." Ruth's voice shook now. "Step back right now. Or what? You'll call the cops again? File another report?" He laughed, cruel and sharp. "Nobody's coming to save you, sweetheart. It's just you and me and the lesson you're about to learn." Miguel started moving toward them. Another customer pulled out their phone. Ruth stood frozen, understanding with crystal clarity that this was the moment every woman fears and prepares for. The moment when a man's entitlement meets a woman's refusal and something breaks. "Don't flatter yourself," she said quietly, desperately trying to de-escalate. "You're not worth this. Just leave, and we can forget." "Forget?" James's voice rose to a shout. "You want me to forget how you've treated me? How you made me look? You think you can just dismiss me like I'm nothing? You are nothing." The words came out hard and final. "You're a sad little man who can't handle rejection, and I'm done being afraid of you." The entire cafe was watching now. Phones were recording. Someone was definitely calling the police, and James Pellote, faced with public humiliation and a woman who refused to bow, made his choice. "You should have learned when to shut your mouth," he said. Then he kicked her. The impact came fast and brutal. James's boot connected with Ruth's side, just below her ribs, with the full force of his rage behind it. The pain was instant and blinding, a white-hot explosion that stole the air from her lungs and sent her sprawling backward. She crashed into a table. Coffee cups shattered, ceramic exploding across the floor in a spray of brown liquid and sharp fragments. A croissant tumbled, pastries scattered. Ruth hit the ground hard, her head narrowly missing the table leg, dark curls spilling across broken porcelain and spilled espresso. For a moment, there was only shock. Complete, paralyzed shock. Then the cafe erupted. A woman screamed. A child started crying. Someone yelled, "Oh my God," over and over like a mantra. Chairs scraped as people jumped to their feet. An elderly man knocked over his water glass in his rush to stand. Miguel vaulted over the counter, kitchen knife still in hand. "Call 911. Someone call 911. Jenna stood frozen by the coffee station, hand over her mouth, phone shaking in her grip. Ruth lay on the floor, curled on her side, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. Pain radiated through her torso in waves. Her uniform was soaked with coffee, her hands bleeding from where she'd tried to catch herself on broken ceramic. Above her, James stood breathing hard, fists still clenched, face flushed with adrenaline and something that looked almost like satisfaction. "That's what you get," he panted. "That's what happens when you don't know your place." Nobody moved. They just stared at him, this man who'd just assaulted a woman in broad daylight, in front of dozens of witnesses, and seemed to feel justified doing it. Ruth pushed herself up on trembling arms. Every breath was agony. She could feel bruising already forming, ribs screaming in protest. But she didn't stay down. She wouldn't stay down. Using the overturned table for support, Ruth pulled herself to her knees, then slowly, painfully, to her feet. Coffee dripped from her clothes. Blood ran from cuts on her palms. Her vision swam, but she locked her eyes on James's face. "You don't get to touch me," she said, voice hoarse but steady. James laughed, actually laughed, as if she'd told a joke. As if her defiance was amusing rather than dangerous. As if this was all still a game he was winning. "Who's going to stop me? You?" He took a step toward her, emboldened by his own violence. "You think anyone here cares about you? You're just—" The door opened. The sound cut through the chaos like a knife. Everyone turned. Massimo DeSantis stood in the doorway, backlit by afternoon sun, wearing a black suit with no tie. His collar was open, revealing tattoos that wound up his neck like vines dark ink on olive skin. His expression was utterly calm, but there was something in his eyes that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Two men flanked him. One had a neatly trimmed beard and wore a dark suit that fit too perfectly to be off the rack. The other was taller, broader, with scars visible on his knuckles where his hands hung loose at his sides. They didn't rush, they walked. The crowd parted instinctively, creating a path through the cafe like Moses and the Red Sea. Massimo's eyes swept the scene in seconds. The broken dishes, the terrified customers, Ruth bleeding and bruised against the table, and James standing over her like a hunter over prey. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That was the only sign of emotion. He crossed the cafe in measured strides and went directly to Ruth, kneeling beside her without acknowledging James at all. "Are you hurt?" His voice was quiet, gentle, meant only for her. Ruth nodded, one hand pressed against her ribs. "Yes. Can you stand?" "I am standing." A ghost of something, pride maybe, or pain flickered across Massimo's face. He touched her cheek carefully, examining the cuts on her hands, the way she was holding her side. Who did this? Ruth didn't need to answer. They both knew, but she wanted to say it, needed to name it. Him. Massimo stood slowly, deliberately, and finally turned his attention to James. James had gone pale. The swagger had drained from his posture like water from a broken glass. He was looking at Massimo the way a rabbit looks at a wolf, recognizing, too late, that he'd made a terrible mistake. Who are you?" James stammered, trying to reassert control and failing miserably. Massimo didn't answer immediately. He buttoned his suit jacket with casual precision, as if preparing for a business meeting rather than a confrontation. "You've been harassing my fiancée?" he said finally, voice even and cold. "For weeks, you followed her. You waited outside her workplace. You threatened her, and today, you assaulted her." The cafe was silent except for the soft sobbing of the child in the corner and the distant sound of sirens approaching. James's eyes darted to the door, calculating escape routes. The bearded man moved almost imperceptibly, blocking the exit. "I didn't," James's voice cracked. "Look, I didn't know she was with anyone. If I'd known—" "If you'd known, you would have what?" Massimo took one step forward. Just one. "Respected her? Left her alone? Or are you saying you only respect women who belong to other men?" James backed up, nearly tripping over a chair. "I didn't mean it's not like that." "Then what is it like?" Someone in the back whispered a name. DeSantis. The whisper spread like wildfire, customer to customer, recognition dawning in waves. James heard it. His face went from pale to ashen. "Oh God," he breathed. "Oh God, I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Massimo replied. His tone never changed, still calm, still measured, somehow more terrifying for its control. "You assumed. You took what you wanted without permission, without consequence, because you believed no one would stop you." The taller man behind Massimo produced a phone, speaking quietly into it in Italian. The sirens were getting closer. Massimo turned back to Ruth. "What do you want? Do you want him removed, or do you want him to understand?" Ruth looked at James, this man who'd made her afraid, who'd stolen her peace, who'd convinced himself his desires mattered more than her humanity. She met Massimo's eyes. "I want him to understand." Massimo nodded once, a silent acknowledgement of Ruth's choice. Then he turned back to James, and the air in the cafe seemed to compress, as if the building itself was holding its breath. "Do you understand what you've done?" Massimo asked quietly. James opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? I lost my temper. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean to kick her?" Massimo's voice remained steady, almost conversational, which made it more unnerving. "You didn't mean to spend 3 weeks stalking her? Waiting outside her workplace? Following her to her car?" Each question landed like a blow. James's eyes darted around the cafe, looking for allies, for escape, for anything that might save him. He found only frightened faces and recording phones. "I didn't know she was your—" James stopped himself, realizing too late how that would sound. "My what?" Massimo tilted his head slightly. "My fiancée? My woman? Say it. Tell everyone here what you were going to say." James's throat worked, but no words came out. "You were going to say that if you'd known she belonged to someone, you would have left her alone." Massimo took another step forward. James backed into a table, trapped. "Which means you don't respect her. You only respect me. The man, the owner, the threat. That's not I didn't mean. But she told you no." Massimo's voice dropped lower, forcing everyone to strain to hear. "She told you no 17 times. She told you to stop, to leave her alone. She told you clearly, repeatedly, in every way a person can communicate unwillingness, and you ignored all of it, because what she wanted didn't matter to you." The bearded man, Luca. Ruth remembered Massimo mentioning him, moved to stand by the door. Not blocking it. Exactly. Just present, watchful. Miguel had lowered the knife but hadn't moved. Jenna had stopped recording but held her phone like a weapon. The sirens were close now, maybe 2 blocks away. "Here's what's going to happen," Massimo said, speaking to James but loud enough for the entire cafe to hear. "You're going to apologize to Ruth. Not to me. To her. You're going to look at the woman you assaulted and acknowledge what you did." James's eyes flickered to Ruth, then away. "I'm sorry." "No." Ruth's voice cut through the space, stronger now despite the pain. She pushed away from the table, standing fully upright, even though it made her ribs scream. "Look at me when you apologize." James flinched. Actually flinched. "Look at her." Massimo's words were precise, leaving no room for negotiation. Slowly, James raised his eyes to Ruth's face. What he saw there clearly unsettled him, not fear or tears, but cold, unwavering judgment. "I'm sorry," James said again, voice shaking now. "For what?" Ruth asked. For hitting you." "Kicking me," Ruth corrected. "You kicked me. Say it." James swallowed hard. "For kicking you." "And?" His face crumpled slightly. "For following you. For not listening when you said no." Ruth didn't smile, didn't soften. She just nodded once, acknowledging that he'd finally said it. But she wasn't done. "You know what the worst part is?" she said quietly. "It's not even the kick. It's that you spent weeks convincing yourself you were the good guy, that I was the problem for not being flattered by your attention, that my boundaries were obstacles to overcome instead of lines you had no right to cross." James looked down at his feet. "Look at me," Ruth commanded, and he obeyed. "You're not sorry you did it. You're sorry there are consequences." The truth of it hung in the air like smoke. Massimo moved then, stepping between Ruth and James with protective instinct. "The police are 30 seconds away," he said calmly. "They'll arrest you for assault. There are—" He glanced around the room. At least 15 witnesses, multiple video recordings. When you go to court, and you will go to court, all of this will be evidence. Your name will be attached to this forever. James's knees nearly buckled. But before they arrive, I want you to understand something else. Massimo leaned in slightly, voice dropping so only James and those closest could hear. Ruth asked me not to handle this my way. She wanted to do it properly, police reports, legal channels, the right way, and I respected that. But if you ever come near her again, if you speak her name, if you so much as think about her, those police reports won't matter anymore. I won't. I swear I won't. I'm not finished. Massimo's tone never rose, never hardened, but James went absolutely still. You hurt someone I love. You made her afraid in her own workplace. You stole her peace. And now you'll face the legal consequences for that, which she deserves to see. But understand this clearly. The law is her justice. If you cross this line again, you'll face mine. The taller man by the door shifted slightly, jacket opening just enough to reveal a shoulder holster. James saw it. His face went chalk white. Do we understand each other? Massimo asked. Yes, James whispered. Yes, I understand. Good. Police cars screeched to a stop outside, red and blue lights painting the cafe windows. Car doors slammed. Radios crackled. Massimo stepped back, creating space, transforming instantly from the man who'd just delivered a quiet threat into the concerned fiancée. She needs medical attention, he called to the officers as they entered, weapons drawn, trying to assess the chaotic scene. She was assaulted. He kicked her. Massimo pointed at James without looking at him. Multiple witnesses, multiple recordings. Officer Hernandez was first through the door, the same officer who'd taken Ruth's report that morning. Her eyes widened when she saw Ruth's condition, then narrowed when she recognized James. Ma'am, are you hurt? Hernandez approached carefully. Yes, Ruth said. He kicked me. I think my ribs might be bruised or cracked. Don't move. We're calling an ambulance. Hernandez turned to her partner. Cuff him. James didn't resist as the second officer grabbed his arms, reading him his rights in a steady monotone that felt surreal against the backdrop of everything that had just happened. As they led James toward the door, he looked back once at Ruth. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She wanted him to see her standing. The door closed behind them, sirens fading as the police car pulled away. Only then did Ruth's knees weaken. Massimo was there instantly, arm around her waist, supporting her weight. I've got you, he murmured. And for the first time since James had walked in, Ruth let herself lean on someone else. The ambulance arrived 6 minutes later. Ruth sat in a chair Massimo had righted, his jacket draped over her coffee-stained uniform, his hand steady on her shoulder. The paramedics, a woman with kind eyes and a young man who moved with practiced efficiency, knelt beside her, asking questions in calm, clinical voices. Can you rate your pain on a scale of 1 to 10? 7, maybe 8, when I breathe deeply. Any dizziness? Nausea? A little dizzy. No nausea. They examined her ribs with gentle fingers, checked her pupils, cleaned the cuts on her palms. The female paramedic, whose name tag read Torres, looked up at Massimo. She needs x-rays. Possible fractured ribs. We should transport her. I'll follow, Massimo said immediately. Sir, are you family? I'm her fiancé. Torres nodded, turning back to Ruth. Do you consent to treatment and transport? Ruth hesitated, looking around the cafe. Customers were still there, some giving statements to officers, others clustered in corners whispering. Jenna stood by the counter, mascara running down her face. Miguel had his arm around her shoulders. The cafe looked like a crime scene because it was one, Ruth. Massimo crouched beside her chair so they were eye level. Let them help you. She nodded. Okay. They loaded her onto a gurney, strapping her in with practiced efficiency. As they wheeled her toward the ambulance, Ruth saw Paul, her manager, standing by the espresso machine, face pale, phone pressed to his ear. He caught her eye and looked away quickly. The gesture was small, but it burned. The hospital was sterile and too bright, and filled with the antiseptic smell Ruth associated with her mother's final days. She pushed the memory away as they wheeled her through automatic doors into the emergency department. Massimo stayed close, ignoring the family-only protests from a nurse until Torres intervened. He's her emergency contact. Let him through. X-rays confirmed what Torres had suspected. 2 fractured ribs, severe bruising, and deep tissue damage. Nothing life-threatening, but painful. Healing would take weeks. You're lucky, the ER doctor said, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, a few inches higher, and we'd be talking about lung contusion. A different angle and we'd be discussing internal bleeding. Lucky. Ruth didn't feel lucky. She felt violated, exhausted, angry. The doctor prescribed pain medication and strict rest. No lifting anything over 5 pounds, no strenuous activity. Someone needs to stay with you for the next 48 hours in case of complications. I'll be with her, Massimo said. They didn't get home until after 8 p.m. Massimo helped her into the apartment, moving slowly, letting her set the pace. Every step was agony, every breath a reminder of James's boot connecting with her body. Couch or bed? He asked. Couch. I want to see the door. He understood without her needing to explain. Massimo settled her on the couch with pillows strategically placed to support her ribs. He brought water, medication, the heating pad her physical therapist had recommended years ago for a different injury. Then he sat beside her, careful not to jostle her, and waited. Ruth stared at the opposite wall, processing, replaying, trying to make sense of the fact that this morning she'd been a waitress and tonight she was a victim. I don't want to be afraid in my own life, she said finally. You won't be. How can you promise that? He's out there. Yes, he's arrested, but he'll make bail. Ruth. Massimo took her hand carefully. Look at me. She did. James Pellet's life as he knew it ended the moment he touched you. Massimo's voice was calm, factual, as if discussing the weather. By tomorrow morning, his name and face will be all over the news. Assault caught on camera in a crowded cafe. He'll be fired from his job if he hasn't been already. His family will see it. His friends. Everyone he's ever known. That's not justice. That's just shame. It's the beginning. Massimo's thumb traced circles on her uninjured palm. The legal system will give you official justice charges, trial, conviction, but the world will give you something else. The truth, publicly acknowledged, impossible to deny. Ruth closed her eyes. I just wanted him to leave me alone. I know. And when that didn't work, I wanted the system to protect me. I know. And when that didn't work either, her voice cracked. I wanted to believe I could handle it myself, that if I was just firm enough, clear enough, strong enough. You were all of those things, Massimo interrupted gently. This isn't your failure. It's the world's. You did everything right, and it still happened. And that's not fair, and it's not your fault. Tears came then, hot and angry and exhausted. Massimo held her carefully, mindful of her ribs, letting her cry against his shoulder until the storm passed. Later, when the pain medication had dulled the worst of it, and Ruth was dozing on the couch, Massimo stepped onto the balcony and made a phone call. Luca, he said quietly when the line connected. Boss, James Pellet, I want to know everything. Where he lives, where he works, if he still has a job, who his friends are, where his family lives, his bank accounts, his debts, his habits, his weaknesses, everything. Already on it. I'll have a full report by morning. Good. Massimo paused. And Luca? Make sure word spreads in the right circles. I want everyone to know what he did and who he did it to. Consider it done. Massimo hung up and stood there for a moment, looking out at the city lights, hands gripping the railing. Ruth wanted justice through proper channels, and she would have it. He'd make sure of that. He had lawyers who could guarantee James faced maximum consequences, who could ensure the case didn't get buried or plea bargained into nothing. But Ruth didn't need to know about the other consequences, the ones that would unfold quietly, systematically, in ways she'd never have to see. Men who hurt women under his protection didn't just face legal trouble. They faced erasure. James Pellet would learn that some mistakes don't just cost you freedom or reputation. They cost you everything. Behind him, through the sliding door, Ruth stirred on the couch. Massimo went back inside immediately, kneeling beside her. I'm here, he said softly. You're safe. She opened her eyes, still foggy with medication. Promise? Always. And Massimo DeSantis always kept his promises, even the ones Ruth didn't know he'd made. Ruth didn't sleep that night. The pain medication helped with her ribs but did nothing for the loop playing in her mind. James's face twisted with rage. The moment of impact, the sound of ceramic shattering, the taste of fear sharp and metallic on her tongue. Every time she closed her eyes, she was back on that floor. Massimo stayed awake with her. He didn't try to fix it with words or tell her it would be okay. He just sat beside the couch in the pre-dawn darkness, his presence solid and unwavering, ready if she needed him. When morning finally came, gray light filtering through the curtains. Ruth's phone started buzzing. First, Jenna. "Oh my God, Ruth, are you okay? The video is everywhere. I'm so sorry. I should have done something sooner." Then other coworkers. Then numbers she didn't recognize. Then her cousin in Portland who she hadn't spoken to in 2 years. "Give me your phone," Massimo said gently. Ruth handed it over without protest. He scrolled through, face unreadable. "It's viral. The video. Someone posted it, and it spread." "What video?" "The cafe. Everything. James kicking you. What he said before. Me arriving. All of it." Ruth's stomach clenched. "How many people have seen it?" Massimo hesitated. "Enough." He showed her the screen. A video titled, "Man assaults waitress after weeks of harassment. What happens next will shock you," had 3 million views and climbing. The comments were a mixture of outrage, support, and the predictable victim blaming that made Ruth's skin crawl. She should have been nicer to him. What did she do to make him so angry? This is what happens when women think they're too good for regular guys. But mostly, I hope she's okay. I hope they throw him in jail forever. I hope she knows she did nothing wrong. Ruth set the phone down, hands shaking. "I didn't want this. I didn't want to be a spectacle. I know. I wanted to handle it quietly, professionally, the right way, and now I'm entertainment. People are watching the worst moment of my life for fun." Massimo moved to sit beside her carefully. "They're also watching a woman refuse to stay down. They're watching you stand up to him even after he hurt you. That matters. Does it? Because right now it just feels like I'm being punished twice. Once by James, and once by everyone who gets to replay my trauma whenever they want." She wasn't wrong. Massimo knew she wasn't wrong. But before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. 2 detectives stood in the hallway, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a younger man who looked apologetic just for existing. "Miss Keaton?" "I'm Detective Rivera. This is Detective Park. We need to take your statement about yesterday's incident." Ruth invited them in, moving slowly, every step a reminder. They sat at the kitchen table, recording device between them, and walked Ruth through every detail. When James first appeared, what he said, how many times she'd rejected him, the parking lot confrontation, the final altercation. "Why didn't you call the police before yesterday?" Detective Park asked. "I did," Ruth said firmly. "I filed a report Friday morning. Officer Hernandez took my statement. I was told there wasn't much that could be done unless he escalated." Rivera made a note. "And your manager? Did you report James's behavior to management?" "Yes, Paul Anderson, the owner. He said James was a paying customer, and unless he actually threatened me, he couldn't ban him." "Even though he was harassing you?" "Even though." Rivera's jaw tightened slightly. "We'll be speaking with Mr. Anderson." They asked about Massimo next carefully, professionally, but with an edge of suspicion that Ruth recognized immediately. "Your fiancé arrived very quickly after the assault. How did he know to come?" "I texted him during my break that James was acting agitated," Ruth said, which was partially true. She'd texted Massimo that morning saying she had a bad feeling, and he'd promised to check in around 2 p.m. He was already on his way when it happened. "And the 2 men with him?" "Business associates. Massimo works in private security." It wasn't technically a lie. Everything Massimo did was, in a sense, security. Just not the kind these detectives would find in any legitimate database. Rivera studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "James Pellet was arraigned this morning. The DA is charging him with assault and battery, criminal harassment, and stalking. Given the video evidence and witness statements, they're confident about conviction." "What about bail?" Ruth asked. "Set at $50,000. He posted it an hour ago." The room went cold. "He's out?" Ruth's voice came out small, childlike. "He's already out? With conditions?" Detective Park added quickly. "No contact order. He can't come within 500 feet of you, your workplace, or your residence. If he violates it, he goes straight back to jail." "And if he violates it and hurts me before you catch him?" Ruth asked. "What then?" Park had no answer for that. After they left, Ruth sat at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Massimo was on the phone in the bedroom, voice low and rapid in Italian, making arrangements she didn't want to know about. She thought about James out there somewhere, free, angry, humiliated. She thought about the video circulating, her face frozen in pain for millions to see. She thought about going back to the cafe, if she even could, if she even wanted to. She thought about how she'd done everything right, set boundaries, Filed reports, spoken up, fought back, and still ended up here. Injured, exposed, afraid. Massimo emerged from the bedroom. Luca's outside. He'll be there overnight, every night, until the trial. You won't see him, but he'll be there. You're having me watched. I'm having you protected. There's a difference. Ruth wanted to argue, wanted to insist she didn't need a bodyguard, wanted to maintain some illusion of normalcy. But she was too tired, too sore, too scared. Okay, she whispered. Massimo knelt in front of her chair, taking both her hands. I know this isn't what you wanted. I know you wanted to handle this yourself, your way, through proper channels. And you did. You were brave and strong and you did everything right. But brave women still deserve protection. Strong women still deserve backup. There's no shame in that. Ruth's eyes burned with unshed tears. I don't feel brave. I feel broken. You're not broken. You're hurt. And hurt things heal, especially when they're protected while they do. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his, breathing in the familiar scent of him sandalwood and safety and the promise that she wasn't alone. What happens now? She asked. Now? Massimo pulled back slightly to meet her eyes. Now we make sure James Pellet understands that some consequences last longer than a court date. Now we make sure this never happens to you again. And now you heal. In that order? In whatever order you need. The morning after James made bail, Ruth woke to the sterile scent of antiseptic and the dull, ever-present ache in her ribs. Sunlight streamed through the blinds, cutting sharp lines across the bedroom floor. Next to her, Massimo's side of the bed was empty, the sheets cool. She could hear the quiet murmur of his voice in the living room, speaking in low, rapid Italian. She didn't move. She lay there, cataloging the pain, a physical map of what had been done to her. But beneath the bruises, something else was crystallizing, a cold, clear anger. Not the hot, frantic fear from the cafe floor, but something steadier, something that demanded more than just survival. In the living room, Massimo ended his call. Ruth heard the soft click of his phone on the table, then his footsteps approaching. He paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the light. You're awake, he said softly. I heard you talking. Luca, James was released 2 hours ago. He's at his sister's apartment in Ridgewood. Ruth pushed herself up carefully, wincing. And he's already trying to spin the story. Massimo entered, sitting on the edge of the bed. His expression was neutral, but Ruth saw the tension in his jaw. He told his sister you led him on, that you were flirting for bigger tips, then changed your mind and set him up when your rich boyfriend showed up. The words shouldn't have hurt. She knew what James was, but they landed like shards of glass. He's saying that? After the video? The video shows the kick, Ruth. It doesn't show the 3 weeks before. He's using the gap to plant doubt. A familiar frustration tightened her throat. So it starts again. What did she do to provoke him? Chorus. No. Massimo's voice was absolute. It doesn't. Because this time the chorus doesn't get the last word. He handed her a tablet. On the screen was a dossier, photos, timelines, documents, James Pellet's life, laid bare. He's done this before, Ruth whispered, scrolling. 3 times that we've confirmed. A barista in Queens 2 years ago. Got her fired by complaining to management after she rejected him. A receptionist at his old job. HR had a file, persistent, unwanted attention. They transferred her. He quit shortly after. And a neighbor in his last building, who moved out 6 months early to get away from him. Ruth stared at the documents, a chill spreading through her. They all reported him, and nothing happened. Nothing that stuck, Massimo corrected gently. Until now. Because of you, he countered. You stood up, you let it be recorded. You created a record that can't be ignored. He touched her hand. My world is just ensuring it isn't ignored. Later that day, Detective Rivera called. Miss Keaton, we've had 2 more women come forward since the video went public. Former targets of James Pellet. Their statements corroborate your pattern of harassment. The DA is adding prior bad acts to the motion for trial. Ruth clutched the phone, sitting at her kitchen table. What does that mean? It means the jury gets to hear he's a repeat offender. It significantly strengthens our case. Rivera paused. It also means you weren't alone. You weren't crazy. You weren't overreacting. The validation was a physical relief, a weight she hadn't fully acknowledged lifting from her chest. But it was bittersweet. I wish they hadn't had to go through it too. So do I, Rivera said, her tone shifting into something more personal. For what it's worth, I'm sorry the system didn't catch him before he got to you. Sometimes it takes a louder noise. After the call, Ruth scrolled through the news headlines on her phone. The story was everywhere, but the narrative had shifted. It was no longer just cafe assault. Outlets were running pieces with titles like The Pattern of Predation and When No Isn't Enough, The Escalation of Harassment. James's face was pixelated in some, clear in others, alongside quotes from legal experts and advocates. He was becoming a case study, a symbol. Ruth knew that on some level, it was justice, but it also felt strangely disembodying. She was the victim at the center, yet the story was growing beyond her. She was glad for the shift, glad people were talking about the before and not just the explosive after. But she missed being just Ruth, the woman, not the example. Massimo seemed to understand without her saying it. He didn't flood her with clippings or talk strategy. He simply asked, "What do you need today?" "I need to not feel like a prisoner in my home," she said. So he took her for a drive. Not anywhere in particular, just through the city with the windows down, Luca following discreetly 2 cars back. They didn't talk much. Ruth watched the city pass by people living normal lives, unaware of the tremors in hers. "He tried to call his boss today," Massimo said after a long silence, his eyes on the road. To explain, the call was short. He was fired. Within minutes of the video trending, his corporate HR department issued a statement condemning violence against women before his bail was even processed. Ruth absorbed this. So he's lost his job, his reputation, he's facing trial. That's a lot. "It's the consequence of his choice," Massimo said, his voice leaving no room for pity. "Is it enough?" The question slipped out, raw and honest. Massimo glanced at her. "Do you want it to be?" She thought about it. Thought about the fear in the parking lot, the dread every morning walking into work, the searing pain of the kick. "I want him to understand, truly understand, that he is not the victim, that his pain is the result of his actions, not my refusal." She looked out the window. "I don't know if losing everything teaches that lesson, or just breeds more resentment." "Then the law will teach it," Massimo said. "And if the law fails, the world has. And if the world forgets." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The next stop was unexpected. Massimo pulled up outside a modest brick building a women's crisis center. Ruth looked at him, confused. "You said the system failed you," he said simply. Luca did some digging. "This place is underfunded. They help women file restraining orders, navigate the courts, find safe housing. They could use a significant donation. Anonymous if you prefer." Ruth stared at the building, emotion swelling in her throat. This wasn't retaliation. This was redirection, taking the poison of her experience and trying to create an antidote for someone else. "You're trying to fix it," she whispered. "I'm trying to honor how you wanted to handle it," he corrected. "Through channels, through support, making the system work better for the next woman." He looked at her. "This is your call, Ruth, not mine." She thought of the dossier, of the other women who had been ground down by James's persistence and a system's indifference. She thought of Jenna, of Mrs. Alice, of all the people who had seen something but felt powerless. "Make the donation," she said, her voice firm, "but not anonymous, in the name of everyone who said no and wasn't heard." That evening, as dusk settled, Luca called. Massimo put it on speaker. "He's packing." Luca's voice came through, clear and detached. His sister asked him to leave. Landlord of his old place won't take him back. He's trying to crash with a friend from college. But the friend saw the news. Said no. He's sitting in his car outside a motel on the highway. He looks unraveled. Ruth pictured it. James, alone in a cheap sedan, his life compacted into a duffel bag, doors closing everywhere he turned. She waited for the surge of satisfaction. It didn't come. Instead, she felt a profound, weary sadness. "He did this," she said, more to herself than anyone. "He built this cage." "Yes," Massimo agreed, watching her. "He did." The final beat came just before midnight. An email alert popped up on Ruth's laptop, a notification from the court. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was a copy of a motion filed by James Pellet's new, court-appointed lawyer. A motion to seek a plea deal. The proposed offer, Guilty to felony assault and criminal harassment. No contact with Ruth Keaton for life. Mandated enrollment in a behavioral correction program. A public apology, dictated by the court. He was folding. The man who wouldn't take no for an answer was finally saying yes to consequences. Ruth read it twice, then closed her eyes. The legal machinery was grinding forward, efficient and cold. It would likely be accepted. There would be no dramatic trial, no cathartic confrontation on a witness stand. Just paperwork and a cell. It felt anticlimactic. It felt right. Massimo read the motion over her shoulder. It's a good deal. For you. It guarantees he's branded a felon. It guarantees he stays away. It's over. Is it? Ruth asked, the echo of James's voice. You'll regret this, still a faint whisper in her memory. Massimo turned her chair to face him, his hands on her shoulders. The threat is over. The fear. That may take time, but you don't have to do it looking over your shoulder. That part is finished. He was right. This was the reckoning. Not a violent showdown in the shadows, but a slow, inexorable collapse in the light. James was being dismantled by the very world he thought would excuse him by employers, by family, by the law, by public opinion. Ruth stood and walked to the balcony, looking out at the city's glittering grid. The cold air soothed her bruised skin. She thought of the donation to the crisis center, of the other women finding their voices, of the next James Pellet who might think twice. The reckoning wasn't just for James. It was for every silence he'd counted on. And in the quiet of the night, with the city humming below and Massimo a steady presence behind her, Ruth let herself believe that maybe, sometimes, a reckoning could feel like a beginning. 4 weeks later, Ruth walked into the Riverside Cafe at 7 a.m. She didn't have to. Massimo had made it clear with the settlement from the civil suit against James and the cafe's ownership. She never had to work another day if she didn't want to. But this wasn't about money. It was about territory, about reclaiming the ground where she had been made to feel small. The bell above the door chimed the same familiar note. The smell of fresh coffee and baking pastry wrapped around her, a scent that had once meant comfort, then fear, and now, something else entirely. The cafe was different. Paul was gone. Sold the business to a local family who had read the news and made their first order of business a complete staff policy overhaul. Miguel was now the general manager. Jenna was head waitress. And at the host stand, a new sign stood prominently. We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone. Harassment of our staff will not be tolerated. Your coffee is welcome. Your entitlement is not. Jenna looked up from wiping the counter. For a second, she just stared, her eyes wide. Then she dropped the rag and rushed over, wrapping Ruth in a careful, gentle hug. You're really here, Jenna whispered, her voice thick. I'm really here, Ruth said, and found she meant it. The morning rush was a quiet symphony of normalcy. Regulars did double takes when they saw her, their expressions cycling through surprise, concern, and then, warmly, respect. Mrs. Alice, at her usual Tuesday table, simply reached out and squeezed Ruth's hand as she passed, saying nothing. Nothing needed to be said. Ruth didn't wait tables. Her ribs were still tender, her energy limited. Instead, she sat at a corner booth with a laptop, drafting training protocols for the new owners, clear guidelines on how to support staff facing customer harassment, a step-by-step escalation plan that didn't end with just ignore it. She was halfway through when a shadow fell across her table. She looked up, expecting Massimo, who had promised to stop by. It was Detective Rivera. Mind if I sit? Rivera asked, her sharp eyes softer than usual. Please. Ruth closed her laptop. Rivera slid into the booth, placing a manila folder on the table. James Pellet accepted the plea deal yesterday. He'll be formally sentenced next week. 15 months, with time served and good behavior. He'll likely do 10, followed by 3 years of probation and mandatory counseling. Ruth nodded, absorbing the finality of it. And the no-contact order? Permanent. It's part of the sentencing. If he so much as looks you up online, he violates probation and goes back for the full term. Rivera tapped the folder. This is a copy of his signed confession, and the signed apology, as dictated by the court. You don't have to read it, but it's yours if you want it. Ruth looked at the folder but didn't open it. The words inside didn't matter. They were court-mandated. Empty. The real apology had been the consequences. The loss, the shame, the crushing weight of his own choices. Thank you, Ruth said, meaning it. Rivera hesitated. I worked your case off the clock. Did you know that? Ruth shook her head. I had a sister. A situation. Similar, but it didn't end with a viral video. It ended quietly. And nothing happened. Rivera's jaw tightened. Your case. Getting to make sure something happened? It mattered. To more people than you know. She left soon after, leaving the folder on the table. Ruth let it sit, a neutral presence. It was not a trophy. It was just a piece of paper. Her peace did not live inside it. Massimo arrived just before noon. He entered not with the chilling silence of that terrible afternoon, but with a quiet nod to Miguel and a warm smile for Jenna. He wore a simple gray sweater and dark jeans, looking less like a man from a whispered legend and more like a handsome fiancé coming to meet the woman he loved for lunch. He slid into the booth opposite her, his eyes scanning her face. How does it feel? Ruth looked around. At the sunlight streaming through the front window. At the couple laughing over shared pancakes. At Jenna refilling coffee with a confident sway in her step. At the new sign by the door. It feels like mine again, she said softly. He reached across the table, his fingers interlacing with hers. The tattoos on his knuckles were just ink here, not a warning. It always was. He was just a squatter in your space. They ordered lunch. Ruth had the tomato soup. Massimo had the turkey club. It was mundane. It was perfect. As they ate, he told her about the crisis center. The donation had been received with stunned gratitude. They were renaming their legal advocacy program in honor of the contribution. They'd asked for a name. What did you tell them? Ruth asked. I told them I'd ask you. She thought for a moment, watching a young waitress new. She didn't know her firmly but politely shut down an overly flirtatious customer at the counter. The customer shrugged, smiled, and turned back to his newspaper. No argument, no escalation. The Keaton Protocol, Ruth said finally, for clear, escalating responses to harassment. So no one has to invent the wheel while they're scared. A slow, proud smile spread across Massimo's face. I'll let them know. Later, as they prepared to leave, Miguel approached, looking nervous. Ruth, before you go, the staff, we didn't do enough. We saw it and we let it become normal. I'm sorry. Ruth looked at him, the tough-line cook who had vaulted the counter with a knife to defend her. You did enough when it counted most, Miguel. You can't fight a ghost until it shows its teeth. Now we all know what to look for earlier. She smiled. That's the point. Walking out into the afternoon sun, Ruth felt lighter than she had in months. The physical weight of her injuries was fading. The psychic weight was being carefully, deliberately, unpacked. At home that evening, she finally opened the folder Rivera had left. She read James Pilote's court-mandated apology. It was as hollow as she'd expected, full of, if I caused any distress, and my actions were misinterpreted. She set it aside without reaction. It held no power. Beneath it was a second document, a handwritten letter, on plain notebook paper, from James's sister. Miss Keaton, you don't know me. I'm James's older sister, Mara. I'm writing this without his knowledge. I just need you to know that I believe you. I've seen the man he becomes when he's told no. I made excuses for him for years. Our parents did too. We called him persistent and misunderstood. We enabled him. I am so sorry we let him get to you. The man on that video is the brother I've been afraid of for a long time. Thank you for being the one he couldn't silence. I hope you are healing. Mara. Ruth held the letter, her eyes stinging. This, more than any legal document, felt like closure, an acknowledgement from inside the monster's own castle. It was a threat of humanity, not for James, but for the wreckage he left in his wake. She showed it to Massimo. He read it silently, then folded it carefully and handed it back. The truth has ripples, he said simply. That night, as they got ready for bed, Ruth stood before the bathroom mirror, examining the fading yellow and green blooms across her side. They were no longer shocking, just part of her landscape, a story her skin told. Massimo came up behind her, his hands resting gently on her hips, his chin on her shoulder. Their eyes met in the reflection. Do you ever regret it? She asked quietly. Choosing a life that has to hide? Being with someone who wanted this? She gestured vaguely at the apartment, the normal life she'd insisted on. He turned her around to face him. I chose you, Ruth. The life was just the container. And you don't hide. You live. On your terms. My world doesn't own you. It answers to you. There's a difference. He kissed her forehead. You were never a prize to be won or a weakness to be exploited. You were a choice. My choice. The words settled in her soul. She hadn't been saved because she was weak. She had been protected because she was chosen. And she had chosen him back, eyes wide open, knowing full well the complications. Their love was not a sanctuary from the world. It was a fortress they built together, facing outward. She took his hand, leading him to the bedroom. Not in desperation, not in search of comfort, but in affirmation. This was her life. Bruised but healing. Complicated but hers. Quiet but never silent. As she drifted to sleep, her head on his chest, the last thought she had was not of James, or kicks, or courtrooms. It was of the cafe booth in the sunlight. Of Jenna's laugh. Of the new sign by the door. Of a simple truth hard-won and carried gently. She had stood her ground, and the ground finally was hers again. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.